I wanted to just say a couple of technological words. It looks like you folks are all living on Zoom these days and really comfortable, and that's great. You might find that you want to be in speaker mode when we start having some conversations this way. It might be easier than gallery mode. If you're on a desktop, you can switch back and forth by moving your mouse over top to the top right corner of the Zoom window. You can toggle between gallery mode and speaker mode. You can do whichever one you want, and you know, make it fit your needs. We make it comfortable, says Eileen, maybe a stretch. Okay, well, by the time we're finished together, you'll be even more comfortable, right? Eileen has found the chat. If some of the rest of you haven't, you can move your mouse over top of the Zoom window, and all of the icons will come up at the bottom of the window. The chat may be a really useful connection for us today. We are 16 in the room, so that stretches the limits of how many people can kind of interact without using the chat. If we were over 20, I'd be saying, let's have all our conversation on the chat. But in a group this size, we probably don't need to worry about that. Any other questions about the technology? By all means, you know, ask me or put a note in the chat, and we're delighted you're here. I was invited to open our meeting with prayer, and I have this candle that's been living beside me for, gosh, now 3 weeks, 4 weeks. So I don't know whether you have a candle at your desk or not, but this has been a meaningful way for me in the programs that I run and in the worship services I lead to make that transition time between the visiting and the gathering and the sort of, hi, how are you, and nice to see you, into the purpose we came. So as we mark that transition ourselves, I'd invite you just to take a moment and breathe and think about all those other meetings you don't have to be at right now, and all of the things that you're struggling with, and let go with them. We'll remember that we are gathered in the light of Christ. That we are colleagues serving the church, but primarily serving God. And that we gather not on our own strength, but in the warmth and the light of God, who holds us and guides us and walks with us in the midst of hard times. And so may the blessing of that God be with us today. Amen. Sarah,
Amen.
Over to you.
All right. I am Sarah Erickson, and I have had the privilege of being part of ALAM and its predecessor, SOCM, since 2004. And I get to work with Israel Galindo and Deborah Weir and Erica and Joshua and Stephen as part of the leadership team. And a note about Helen Blyer, she said she doesn't have an official role. She's getting ready to help ALAM do some research. And so you will be hearing more from her, and we invite, as we invite your participation on this webinar, we invite your participation in those surveys when you start to receive them. This afternoon, we are going to spend some time, I'm going to moderate a conversation back and forth between Stephen Fetter and my colleague Israel Galindo. And we'll chat over some questions for a few minutes, and then Stephen will break us out into small groups where we'll have an opportunity to ponder a couple of questions, which Stephen will post on the screen, and then we'll come back together and largely either a combination of chat and audio, share our responses to the small group conversation. Any questions about that format before we plunge in? And I'm obviously from my home in my living family room with my drooping tulips behind me and a lot of pollen in the air, so I hope I don't cough too much. So Israel Galindo is the leader of a Center for Lifelong Learning that provides both residential and online courses, and it's housed as part of a seminary affiliated with a mainline denomination. Stephen Fetter is bivocational. He is a pastor of a church in Toronto, of the United Church of Canada, And he is a denominational staffer, as he mentioned, providing lifelong learning almost totally online across Canada and all its provinces. So they represent quite a range of the kind of work that we do in lifelong learning. And I would like to start the conversation by asking Israel about the seminary's responses to COVID-19 and how our relationship with the seminary as being part of the seminary affected the responses to the pandemic.
Okay, thank you. So we are situated on a campus, seminary campus. We have our own a building per se, where we have the resources of guest housing. We have 38 guest rooms, classrooms, and we share facilities with the seminary. So with those resources, that facilitates a lot of our programming. We also do off-site programmings, retreats, and other programs, as well as the online programs. So with half of our programming on the seminary campus, of course, as the seminary started making their decisions about their response to the pandemic and its impact on the students and faculty and the residential students. I'm sure, as with many of you, it was a rolling set of decisions as things changed almost daily, and as administration trying to grasp with a new situation to them and to many of us. So our program, we had several programs going on. It was just the beginning of the spring semester, spring programming. So we had one on-campus program going. We had two that were about to follow in its stead, and then we had several off-campus programs going. So the biggest and most immediate impact was when the news from the seminary came that they were going to close the Harrington Center, where we have those 38 guest rooms, and the refectory. So if they had just closed the refectory and kept the housing open, we probably would have gone ahead with a couple of our programs. But with those two resources gone, it just became difficult to go on. So we finished one program that was ongoing. Deborah Weir wrapped that program on, and then in the heels of that, she had another residential program going on. I hope she'll have a chance to talk about her adventures in retooling, reformatting, and regathering that particular program, and the amazing job they did to reformat and actually launch it and get it going and complete it for it. So as the seminary made its decision, we had to cancel some programs. We postponed some others and rescheduled them for later in the fall. As things continue to develop, the seminary also decided that off-campus meetings and programs had to be canceled and restrict travel to meetings and programs. So that impacted our off-campus programs. And we were waiting for those off-campus sites to make their own decisions about how they were going to handle the crisis. As it turned out, we made decisions to cancel before the off-site places made their decisions for it. Fortunately, we had some online courses scheduled and going on, so those are going on as usual. All right, I'll stop there.
Sarah, you're muted.
Stephen, sorry about that. As you were confronted with this in your role in the denomination, how did the denomination's response affect your role providing continuing education and a little bit about how did it affect your response as a pastor?
It's ramped everything up. I feel like I've been living on adrenaline for the last month as we've struggled to pivot everything online really, really fast. So in the congregation that I serve, we're now doing a daily worship service every night at 6 o'clock, as well as Sunday worship at 11 on Sunday mornings. All of it online. Most of it using Zoom. Although the Sunday morning we're also live streaming to YouTube. We've got the Congregational Life Committee phoning through the whole church list once a week so that we can identify people that need help. We've set up ways for people to connect, so if they need groceries, somebody else will go out and buy them for them. And so we're kind of doing a little bit of outreach that way. And we're finding the big driving spiritual need right now is for connection. People are scared and they're lonely and they're sick, not with the COVID, but with something else. And so they can't go to the grocery store and get groceries because they've got the flu or they've got a cold, or the doctor said they're compromised immune system and it's not safe. So there's all of those kinds of things that we need to kind of pivot over to online stuff within the parish. We've got some people joining our worship services by telephone only because they don't have computers. And that's great, except we need to get them hymn books so that they can sing along with the music. So there's all of that kind of stuff going on in the parish. And then here's a little bit of show and tell of the webinars that we've been hosting at United in Learning. So since the 25th of March, we've invented and recorded these 6 already. So we started on the 25th of March with ministry with children and youth, and we had about 200 children and youth leaders from across the country who gathered together to try to talk about how do we do programming when we can't be side by side. And then the next night we had, or that same night, we had a program for church treasurers on how do we manage church finances when all of the tenants aren't paying their rent and the givings are drying up. And we had 1,000 people watching that webinar. It's the biggest thing I've ever managed. And it all got thrown together in about 3 days. And then the next day we did a similar one on congregational finances for the ministers. What do ministers need to know about all the stuff that's being unrolled through the federal government? And so we had 350 ministers sit down with not only our chief financial officer, but also our philanthropy department, talking about how do you encourage the spiritual discipline of generosity and not stumble over these electronic tools, but do this in a way that is furthering God's reign and not just looking for bucks. How do you talk about this in ways that are spiritually sound, that are theologically helpful, and that are encouraging and positive? And we talked with those ministers about how we are in the crisis of our lifetime. That this is as deep a crisis for us as the Second World War was for our grandparents, or the Great Depression was for theirs. That this is changing us and changing our society, and we will not come out of this the same. And we have to think about what it means to be church and not just close the doors and wait for them to come back after it's all over. Because if we do that, why would they bother coming back?
Good. Steve, I'm sorry, you made me think in your question about your observation about the need for connection in the congregation. Mm-hmm. Are you sensing a similar need for connection among the lifelong learners and congregational leaders that you're hearing from?
Oh, absolutely. I've never seen this many people wanting to try to connect on Zoom. And in and around the edges of all of the programming we're doing, I'm constantly getting requests. How do I do this? How do I do that? Help me figure out how to use Zoom. And what we're realizing in the denominational national office is that our role really is skills development, and that our colleagues in the regional office are there to provide pastoral care to our leaders. So we're kind of sharing out the role that way. And what I'm doing as sort of the focal point of all of our online learning right now is giving voice to my colleagues across the National House around how to teach the skills that are necessary to respond to the new programming and challenges that the pandemic is creating.
Thank you.
So we're now doing this weekly. We've got a weekly program for treasurers on Wednesday nights and a weekly program for clergy on Thursday afternoons. We're holding that audience. We seem to have new things to tell them every week, and it's a monster we've created that I just need to keep feeding now. But it's also an exciting time to help the whole denomination think about, what does it mean to be church, and why are we here, and what does God need out of us, and what do our people need out of us, and how do we encourage people to be willing to take risks and reach out in love rather than pull in their horns and be afraid.
Thank you.
That's kind of where we're at.
Good. Israel, and what are you hearing from either other leaders of lifelong learners like lifelong learning like us, or from lifelong learning participants? What are you hearing that people are interested in or think they need most right now?
So I think that connection piece is a big one. This felt need to reach out and stay connected and be informed. If you're monitoring Facebook, you're aware that many pastors have all of a sudden become lifelong learners and learning new skills, as Stephen has mentioned. Some are making really good effort and great deliveries. Others, you can see where the learning curve is. They're humble and transparent in terms of figuring out how to do it for it. But it's got a delightful human quality when you see that vulnerability that they allow themselves to do that. Aside from some of the things that Stephen mentioned in terms of the immediacy of having to figure everything out as we go along, trying to assess what impact the many facets that we deal with, everything from participants, lost time in terms of programmings and planning, managing calendars, and budgeting, and the impact of the financial piece. The other piece that I hear mostly from leaders, program leaders like us, has to do with how long and what's next after this. That phrase new normal is used for the current situation. My own perspective is new normal doesn't happen till after this is over, and we figure out what it looks on the other side. So we're in the midst of it now. Where folks are managing it with some resilience, some imagination. But the other piece, to answer your question, Sarah, has to do with looking a little bit forward. What's it going to look like? So, for example, in our case, we had a very nice budget. We were happy to get through and put forward and looked good. But now the word from the Board of Trustees is that that budget has been scrapped, and a new budget from the start is about to be drafted for it. And so we're waiting to see what that budget looks like for us. So we're sort of on hold in terms of we've got all of next year's programming in place and the year after that. But depending on what the budget from the Board of Trustees decisions are, which is outside of our control, that's going to impact the decisions for programming and resourcing and other aspects of it. So Sarah, in terms of the midst of just dealing with the immediacy, the other aspects of it is looking forward and not having enough information about what it's going to look like after this 3 or 4 months are over for it. So, you know, for us, everything's on the calendar from August on, but who knows?
That's exactly right. Who knows? And it's the time to try to hold things lightly and observe what's going on and to try to find a way forward. Stephen, is there anything you would like to add about your observations of the short and midterm before we go into our breakout sessions.
Yeah, and I had a really helpful conversation this morning with the people who are coming onto Thursday afternoon's webinar. These are a couple of seasoned pastors who've been in their churches or in leading churches for a long time, trying to think their way into how we respond. And we're making a list of the sort of theological and mission related topics that we want to talk about with pastors on Thursday afternoon. We were trying to distinguish between all of the how-to stuff, the strategy, the tools. How do you do breakout rooms in Zoom? And how do you make sure people give money? Because those are strategic and sometimes they're entrepreneurial, and it's really not, I mean, those are tools we need, but it's not really what our focus should be on. How do we distinguish between that and our mission? What are we for? And so we want to talk about ontology. Who are we? Who do we think we are? What's our identity as church leaders, as a church in society? How do we do what we do with more intimacy? And we're realizing that in these online forums, they're much more intimate. We want to talk about sacraments and how do you do sacraments in this setting and what does that mean? And I was saying I'm realizing I want to do communion on Easter Sunday. And I'm realizing that it's going to feel to me, and it needs to feel to them, much more like communion in the home when I go and visit somebody who's dying or somebody who's shut in, rather than communion in the sanctuary. I had a look at the Pope doing Palm Sunday to an empty St. Peter's Square, and I thought that was absolutely wrong. Would have been so much better if he'd brought a camera into his study and said, we can't do the normal thing, but let me talk to you about God. And if he could have been that intimate to 2 billion Catholics around the world, what a change that would have made. I think the challenge of this time in this medium is authenticity and intimacy. We're trying to figure out what it means to do funerals. We're going to have to do a lot of them, and that's kind of scary. I've got 2 people in my congregation right now who are probably close to death, and I expect we'll need a funeral before we can be back together again. So what does that look like? And how do you do that? And how do you do the pastoral care around it? And some of those things, I mean, my colleagues across the nation, and I'm sure across yours too, are asking all of those questions about what does it mean to be minister? What does it mean to be church? What does it mean to celebrate a life when we can't hold each other's hands? And then what does it mean to do outreach? How do we not just take care of each other, but how do we have a presence in the world and care for the hurting and the marginalized and the people who are just outside our doors, but also need support? So that's a whole constellation of needs and issues that we're really trying to think and pray our way into.
Well, and thank you, Stephen and Israel. You've both done a good job of pointing out the complexities and the immediacy and the sort of a shift to the, gee, we're going to be doing this for a while. What else do we need to be able to sustain ourselves with some imagination and reframing? And I think that this is a great time for us to go into the small groups so that we can—
Sarah, one second.
Okay.
Just a question from Helen, just kind of along these lines as well. Because just talking about, she says that there seems to be an overload of efforts online, resources that are being collated, and how do we resist the temptation to respond to the crisis with just more stuff when, depending on where we might be on the trajectory, depending on where we are in the world and where we are in the country, where the virus might be. So that kind of goes hand in hand also with how we're responding to this creatively and authentically, but also in ways that are we can handle and process and not killing ourselves at the same time. So maybe that's something we can bring up in our groups.
Yeah. I would say part of what we need to do is create space so that we're not coming in and saying, we've got all the answers, here's how to fix it. But we're saying we need to gather people together. We need a round table to talk about what does continuing education look like now. There's wisdom here that none of us has individually. We need to do that with church treasurers, but we need to do that with ministers and leaders of children and all of that kind of stuff. And maybe part of our role as educators is not to tell them the answers, but to give them the space where they can noodle it through themselves.
And let's start to do that now in this group by giving us some space. If you'll put up the screen with the slides, Stephen's.
I lost you, Sarah. Hang on.
How can you hear me now?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
You must have bumped the mute button by mistake.
Yeah, well, I'm just trying to use the space bar and I think it was being persnickety. Stephen's going to break us up into several breakout groups, and these are 2 questions to get us started for some discussion in the breakout groups, and then we'll come back together in 15 or so minutes. The questions: what are you hearing in this conversation that are bringing up new ideas, stimulating your imagination along the trajectories of the conversations we've had, and then thinking after the call, what might you do in response to what you've heard today? So Stephen, I'll let you break us up and give us any other directions now.
Sure. No, I think that's easy. I'll just unmute the mics, and you'll get an invitation, I think, to join a breakout room. Say yes, and it'll put you into a little mini Zoom meeting with 3 of your best friends. We've got 3 breakout rooms here, so we're going to have Erica will be kind of a facilitator in breakout 1. Sarah will be a facilitator in breakout 2. Josh will be a facilitator in breakout 3. And as long as everybody gets there easily, then I'll probably come and join group 3 as well. So here we go. Okay, Sarah, I think you need to push the button that says yes. Sarah, are you still there?
Another session soon.
And I'll pipe in here because we actually had a conference planned for May 1st in person on trauma, and we're shifting that online, and we're trying to figure out what is the right way to do that people can really receive that. But some of the leading experts in the field, like Shelley Rambo, and Phyllis Isabella Shepard, are going to be doing that with us online, and we're talking with them about how to work with pastors, other caregivers who are in this trauma, dealing with other people in trauma that's going to keep lasting for quite a while. So I'll just say from Austin Seminary, we're working on that conversation in the near future. I think that's certainly a good conversation for us to have together on continuing ed, but I want to make that, put that out there for you all as well.
Well, and when you've got the info, we'll be happy to share it. Because showing up in some of our best offerings in this time will be another way to build our community and to invite others into that conversation. We are at 3:01.
Can I just say one What,
I was
Sarah?
going to say, what else do we want to say and who's willing to stay on?
Well, I just wanted to quickly say thanks to Diane for coming, because I invited you. I think I just found your name online. I was looking for something else at Virginia and I stumbled across some of your work and I thought, well, hell, I'm going to invite her. So thank you.
Thank you. As I mentioned in the chat box, it's great to find a colleague group. And I think, for example, when you talked about Erica, that's something that is open. I think especially for different denominations, we can copy each other, because sometimes our people just want to hear it from our denomination.
Yes.
And
Yes, absolutely.
and that we can just even get the same speakers or just copy ideas or then repackage it or whatever. I think that's where the collaboration will be key.
Yeah.
Thank you. Because that, helping curate who's available and who's doing the top-notch stuff and is accessible to audiences and willing to take risks and fail, because we're in uncharted territory.
Yeah, we can learn from each other. And I'll say this, as Melissa Wickington, who's on with me and my boss, says a lot. That's really an ethic of abundance. We're here to share with one another and not to hold things closely. That we come to this out of abundance, out of God's abundance.
Anybody else want to add something in chat or audibly say something before we do our little bit of wrap up?
I'm just really grateful for this time with everyone.
Yeah.
It's been fun.
And as Stephen said, if you are interested in doing it sooner than May 5th, indicate that in chat or in a follow-up email. We did not talk about formal evaluation and feedback, but we'll probably do a little thank you reminder thing afterwards. It's like, oh, gee, we didn't do that part.
Erica,
it was important to us to have some discussion starters this time around. But if you want to do an even simpler roundtable, that's easier even to pull together.
We can do that.
Israel and I had to do a little bit of thinking prior to this one. Of course, neither one of us like to do that.
Well, and Mike, we would be interested in, email us too if there are, you wouldn't want to come earlier than 6 a.m., but what other times would be good for you from
Well, just an hour or two later would be ideal.
I can't see why that would be a problem. Yeah, no, I think it's a great idea. Why not?
Yeah, love it.
Thank you.
All right. All right, I think we have a closing slide to put up. Do we, Stephen?
Yeah, we do. Hang on. Takes me a minute. There it is.
And let's thank Stephen, whether it's a wave of hand or a round of applause, for his multifaceted talents. And today, as I said, we do have a next slot scheduled just because we wanted to at least offer something to keep the momentum going. And, continuing on some variation of the theme on the future of Con Ed for ministry in light of COVID-19. And as Helen has raised why now more than ever, we have some critical functions to fill in our institutions, in our denominations, in our ecumenical associations, and in our congregations. So if we can think supportively and creatively, we would love to continue to do so in community, because I think we all have a sense that we need connection as well. All right. So I would just like to offer a brief blessing as we go into the rest of this Holy Week. We know how the end of the Holy Week story is recorded. We know that there's surprise at the empty tomb, and the story still unfolds. And may we continue to be a part of that in ways that show hope to the world. Go in peace. Amen.
Thank you.
Before you all disappear, Melissa has asked us to share email addresses. Is there anybody uncomfortable with that? This is your personal email. I don't want to share it without your permission, but tell me if it's private and you don't want me to share. Otherwise, I'll happily do that.
Sounds good.
Okay, great.
You have all of our emails, right?
Yes, because we made you register. That
With
was
the
why we did
registration. Yep.
it.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. Just
Sneaky, I
vocalizing
know,
it so
but there
that
you go.
people know. Yeah.
No, it was really to send you the connection instructions, right? But yes, no, we have your email addresses. Happy to share them.
All right. Very good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank
See
you.
you
Thank
again
you.
soon.
Peace be
Take
with you.
care.
Blessings of Easter.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Alum team.